So, I'd like to begin with a couple of, I was trying to choose one story, but all the stories of the desert fathers and mothers are so good that you end up not being able to choose. But, so let's begin with this one first. The theme of today that I'd like to explore, and as you know, we've been exploring the theme of solitude and community in the light of St Benedict and Shantideva and other guides and witnesses. And the theme today I'd like to look at is the theme of zeal, of energy or enthusiasm. So keep that in mind. Try not to become too unenthused about it. Okay. Once you got finished?
Yes.
Great. Excellent. Abba Moses asked Abba Silvanus if a monk could live every day with the same enthusiasm that he experienced on the first day of his monastic life. So, those of you who are not monks. Mrs. Smith asked Mrs. Jones if a wife could live every day with the same enthusiasm she experienced on the first day of her honeymoon. Or maybe the second day of the honeymoon. Silvanus replied, if you are genuinely committed to your choice of life, you can live every day, every hour, as it was when you began your life as a monk. So, that's enthusiasm. And then, picking up on the theme of anger that we were looking at a couple of days ago, anger is something we have to fight and face continuously. I asked the Dalai Lama once, some years ago, if he was ever angry and impatient. And he looked at me as if I was completely mad. He said, of course. So the anger and the impatience is with us. And it's with us whether we are in solitude, in that dimension of ourselves, or whether we are in community. But there's a beautiful story here that suggests that we might be able to live without anger. For many years, two hermits lived together without any conflict or disagreement. One suggested that they have a quarrel to see how other people live, because other people are always arguing, fighting. So the other one answered, I don't know how to start a quarrel. And the first said, well, look, I'll put this brick on the ground between us, and I will say it's mine. And then you say, no, it belongs to me. And that's how quarrels begin, how fights begin. So they put the brick between them, and the first one said, that's mine. And the other said, no, that's mine. And the first one said, okay, it belongs to you, you take it. And they were not able to argue with one another. So maybe if our enthusiasm truly can be sustained, maybe it will lead us to be really free from anger, from the spirit of division and conflict. That's the purpose of this enthusiasm that we're going to look at today. John Main was once asked, what is the best way to prepare for meditation? And I think people expected him to say, well, take a few moments of quiet, or do some stretching, or maybe read some scripture, or do something to wake yourself up. But on this occasion, he said, small acts of kindness. Small acts of kindness that we show to others these are the best ways we can prepare for meditation from day to day. And a small act of kindness. I hope that those of you who are living in community on the island during this retreat, sharing houses, sharing meals, I hope that you have experienced what that means, what a small act of kindness shown to another person or shown to yourself, what that can mean to you, how it can change you, how it can illuminate the day, or that hour anyway, how it can enrich you, how it can lift your mood and open your mind. So I hope, and I think the way we live together on a retreat is a very integral part of the retreat itself. We should be living the small things of the day, the meals we share, the preparation of the meals, the getting from A to B, all the different moments of the retreat should be lived with a rather higher level of consciousness or mindfulness or awareness. And that consciousness should be intimately connected with what we are sharing with other people. So it's not just my retreat, and I'm getting something out of this retreat, and I'm with other people because it's convenient for me to be with them because they cook for me every other day. Or it might be a bit lonely if I didn't have other bodies around. So it isn't that the other people are just there as a backdrop, but they are an integral part of the formative and nourishing experience of the retreat. And if we see it in that way, then I think these ways in which we recognize each other's presence and communicate in a very simple, non-verbal way very often, by a small act of kindness, those small acts of kindness become really very powerful ways of deepening the retreat, deepening our consciousness. And these small acts of kindness are both a fruit of meditation and also, as Father John pointed out, a preparation for it. We become better able to show this kindness to each other in small, simple ways because the meditation has been setting us free from our self-centeredness, free from our sadness, free from our introversion, as I was saying yesterday, it frees up the available energy within our psyche so that we can truly enjoy and find joy in each other, with each other, here and now. I was using my computer recently and I realized it was working very slowly, and then I realized I had a lot of things loaded up which were taking up space in the hard drive, which I didn't need anymore, some quite big files. So when I identified them, I just deleted them, and immediately the computer began to operate more quickly and easily. And I think it's the same with meditation. If we're doing a really serious work in meditation, we're not just sitting there bathing in the light of our own self-fixation, but we're truly doing a work, using that leisure, as I've been talking about, using that leisure time of meditation to take the attention off ourselves. That's like deleting these huge unnecessary files, this baggage that we carry that occupy so much of our energy and keep us locked into ourselves and therefore into our sadnesses, our memories, our regrets, or our desires, and so on. So free from that, we become energized, we become capable, in fact, of showing small acts of kindness to each other. We don't even have to say, well, okay, that's the fourth act of kindness I've shown today. I think that's enough for today. We're not counting them, and we're not even self-consciously, artificially looking for ways to be nice to each other, because really the fun and the joy and the pleasure of life is to be able to find those opportunities presenting themselves to us spontaneously and really continuously. So these small acts of kindness are a way of cultivating our solitude, because each act of kindness should come sincerely and spontaneously from the heart, not pre-programmed, not done because we want to get something from it, but something that flows spontaneously and genuinely. So these acts of kindness grow out of our solitude. Remember what we mean by solitude. It involves a certain degree of withdrawal from activity and from thought. You may come to Bere Island, withdraw from your ordinary life for a few days. When we meditate, we withdraw from normal daily activity, from our email, from our messages, and turn off the phone, and we withdraw for a while from ordinary activity and thought. So there's a certain element of withdrawal, but solitude is not defined by the withdrawal. And remember, there are symptoms of withdrawal, because we become addicted to many things at the active level, including our mobile phones and other activities that we become absorbed in. So there will be withdrawal symptoms at first, as we learn to adapt to the new state. We experience this every time we meditate. The mind goes through withdrawal symptoms. That's what we call our distractions and our agitation. So there is an element of withdrawal in solitude, but the essence of solitude is not about being alone in that sense. It is really about finding, recognizing, embracing, discovering our true self and our unique self. Our true self is unique. We often fear actually finding this uniqueness of ourself, because we think it's going to be quite terrifying to discover that we are unique in this cosmos. And sometimes when people do have an insight, an insight is an experience, an insight into this uniqueness of ourself, they often panic at first, because there is only one of you in the universe. That's why it's important to be prepared. But then very, very quickly, if we're lucky, that fear dissolves as we realize that it is this uniqueness that is the basis of our relationship. It's this unique identity which makes it possible for us to be in relationship in a satisfying and complete way with everyone else and with the whole universe. So it is by entering into the solitude that we transcend the terrible demon of loneliness, of isolation, or of paranoia, all of these symptoms of the divided self. So it's when we really enter into solitude that we know who we are, and we know that we are capable of and drawn to and made for relationship. So these small acts of kindness grow out of this solitude, this experience of solitude, and they come from the heart, from this spontaneous spring of our own being, unself-consciously and yet consciously. We know what we're doing, but we're not self-conscious about it. And these small acts of kindness, therefore, that arise from our solitude, also enrich the community that we are discovering we belong to. So in these small acts of kindness, we see how intimately connected solitude and community relationship truly are. A community that doesn't have this kind of exchange of kindness, spontaneous and selfless acts of kindness, is a very poor community. It's really hardly a community, it's more like a formal assembly or a group or a committee. It may be well run, but it lacks heart, it lacks warmth, it lacks tenderness, it lacks humor, it lacks joy, it lacks generosity, it lacks that important quality of gratuitousness, the giving of one person to another without expectation of a reward, without demanding even gratitude as a reward. You know, if you do a small act of kindness and then you wait for something in return, you know, the small acts of kindness falls flat. It's really an offer of a deal to get something back. So these little small acts of kindness, and I've been speaking about them, but I haven't given any illustrations of them. So you tell me what anyone experienced a small act of kindness in the last 24 hours. Yes?
Somebody paying...
Wait a minute. Okay.
Someone paying complete attention to you whilst you're talking.
Somebody paying complete attention while you're talking. Any other small acts of kindness?
A smile.
A smile.
A hot water bottle in the bed.
A hot water bottle in the bed. Yes?
Without being asked.
That you,
Without being asked.
without being asked for. That's very nice.
And when clearing away your dirty dishes, you learn how to do it yourself.
Okay.
Stefan makes us porridge every morning.
Stefan's porridge. I think that's a big act of kindness.
Brandy in the evening.
They give you brandy after.
They've asked for it.
Oh, you get brandy. All right. Well, okay, so we know what small acts of kindness mean. So, these small acts of kindness are really the celebration, or in a way the life, or expressions of the life, conscious manifestations of the life of the community that is nourished by the solitude of its members. So without that solitude, that unique, or that experience of one's unique existence, it would be very difficult, I think, for the community to engender that kind of spontaneous and joyful exchange of self that takes place in those small acts. And these small acts of kindness are magnified by the love they express. So they're not just signs, they are actually living entities. I mean, they transmit something much more than you could measure. We'll come back to this idea of measuring things, because in our culture we're always trying to measure things and compare them and put them into graphs. So these are things that you can't really measure, you just know that they are magnifying the spirit or the love that is there. They don't have to be expensive, they don't have to be grand gestures, but they can be extremely powerful and they can be transformative. They can change the mood of a group and certainly the inner weather of the individuals. If our solitude is not deep and free, in other words, if we're locked into ourselves, into our egotistical identities, we don't see or experience ourselves further than our fears or desires. Am I happy? Am I not happy? Am I getting what I want? I'm angry? I'm sad? If we don't see beyond that and live beyond that level of the ego, then these small acts of kindness are very difficult to perform. It could just become rather ritual gestures or empty gestures rather than sacraments. Remember, a sacrament is the outward sign of an inward reality. So it carries those small signs, those sacraments carry the reality within us, or in this invisible and intangible level of consciousness. They carry that reality. My watch is about to go. They carry that reality out into a shared universe, into a world of signs. And they enrich that world of signs that we live in daily life. That's why one of the great losses, I think, in our culture has been the loss of the ritual, the ritualistic, or the sacramental life. These rituals that bring into ordinary life signs of something deeply and intangibly present within us in the spiritual realm. In a group of people where this solitude is not deep and free, these small acts of kindness are not only hard to perform because they're not coming from a free place, but they may create jealousy in the possessive ego of others. So you do a little act of kindness to one person, then other people look and say, "Oh, why didn't she do it to me? You know, why am I always being forgotten? Or why am I being left out?" And yet, the spirit of freedom and generosity and love that is transmitted in that little sacramental act of kindness can be healing. It can even, although it may arouse jealousy or anger in other people, it nevertheless, depending on how deep it comes from, what depth it comes from, it carries with it the healing power of a true sacrament. Now, these are examples of good zeal. Chapter 72 of the Rule of St Benedict, which is the one but last chapter, is about the good zeal of monks. And this is what he says. It's a short chapter, but it really sums up the whole of his life experience and however many decades he spent living in community after he'd spent a number of years living in solitude in a cave. He then came out and formed communities. And the rule is a distillation, or the spirit of the rule certainly is a distillation of many decades probably of that experience of day-to-day living with people, observing the psychology of the life, observing how certain things worked and others didn't work, observing the dangers of certain practices and being aware that certain warnings should be attached to some things and certain regulations should be attached to others, but at the same time always creating a flexible and really open-minded rule of life. So this last but one chapter is I think the distillation of his understanding of what it's all about, really, why people do form community. And he says, just as there is an evil zeal of bitterness which separates from God and leads to hell, so there is a good zeal which separates from vices and leads to God. Now, interestingly, in that first sentence, both the bitter zeal and the good zeal are both associated with an experience of separation. The bitter zeal makes us feel separate from other people. It divides us, and therefore, if it divides us from each other, it divides us from our true self, and it divides us from God. We're living in a mental state of division, separation, conflict, fear, jealousy, anger, loneliness, all the things that make up hell. So he's describing hell. Hell is separation from the good in ourselves, the good in others, the goodness of God. But then he says, so who wants to live in that evil zeal of bitterness, where you're just feeding off your own poison, just feeding off your own anger, or feeding off your own sense of being a victim, of not being loved enough, or not being shown enough small acts of kindness. So this bitterness, sadness, and anger add up to a state of hell. And he says, who wants to live like that? And there is a way not to live like that, which is stop it. Just stop it. So then he says there is a good zeal. And the good zeal separates from vices and leads to God. So to be separated from your vices, it doesn't only mean cigarettes or too much alcohol or other bad habits, but it means any of these attachments that are no good for us or good for anybody else. Anything which keeps us in hell or keeps hell in us. So there is, with all separation, there is going to be pain. Separation is an inevitable part of life, of growth, of development, from the moment of conception, as the human cell of life begins to separate, multiply, and then achieves a certain level of development and separates from the mother, and then psychologically separates from the parents, and so on. So life, growth, development, change involves separation, and no one likes separation. It's necessary. We need to know how to deal with the anxiety of separation. But what matters is what we are separating from and what we are growing into, what we are expanding into. So the good zeal is what allows us to separate this enthusiasm, this spontaneity, is what enables us to separate from those negative forces that keep us locked into ourselves and into isolation, and therefore opens us to that wholeness of goodness that we call God. And it is this zeal, this good zeal, this commitment to growth, to transcendence, which monks should practice with the most fervent love. So this good zeal, like those small acts of kindness, flow out of and express something much bigger than themselves. It's actually a fervent love that is the fuel of this growth. They should anticipate each other in honor. In other words, recognize the value of each other. We should see the dignity of each person, even the people who don't seem to have much, or the kind of people who don't seem so important in a group, or but to recognize that each member of the community, and that ultimately means everyone you meet, but each member of the community has an equal honor, an equal dignity. Even those who don't maybe seem to have a particularly important role to play. And this is expressed by our patiently enduring each other's infirmities, whether of body or character. So, some laughs already, so presumably you're discovering that. And you discover it very quickly when you're living with other people. In physical community, you very quickly discover that there are people who can't sit down without knocking the chair over, or who are always complaining that the house is cold, or anything else? No? Or, you know, their weaknesses of body or character, you patiently endure them, and therefore you can love them within those weaknesses. And if you can love the weaknesses evident in other people, you are much more likely to believe that you can be loved with your weaknesses. If you are impatient and intolerant and rejecting of other people in their weaknesses, how are you going to believe that other people can accept you as you really are? You will just assume that other people are rejecting you just as you reject them. So this recognition of each other's essential dignity and value is manifested in the way that he uses the word endure. Sometimes you just have to put up with other people's weaknesses. And he says we vie, we compete in paying obedience one to another. Obedience is the central virtue, really, of Benedict's idea of community. Obedience is what enables us to take the attention off ourselves, to listen to the other, rather than listening to the voice of our own ego all the time. So in paying obedience to one another, we are turning towards each other, listening to each other. As John Main says, in community, in Christian community, we draw each other into the light of being. And it's that act of listening, as Rachel was saying, that small act of attention which we pay to each other when we really listen to each other, that's obedience. It's that act of obedience or listening that draws the other out of their isolation. It touches them, and it makes them realize that they exist, that they truly exist in the consciousness of another person. So we compete in listening to each other and paying attention to each other. No one following what he thinks useful for himself, but what benefits another. Well, that's a step further. But if we can recognize each other's dignity, if we can be patient with each other's weaknesses, if we can compete with each other simply at the level of listening to each other, paying attention, being obedient to one another, not competing for attention, but competing in giving attention. It's a very different kind of community, where you have a group of people who are all trying to be the center of attention, or a community where everybody is actually turned towards each other. It's a very different dynamic, isn't it? So then it becomes possible, in Benedict's vision, to follow not what he thinks useful for ourself, but really what is of benefit to another. And again, this is not something that you can really try to do. This is something that happens when you have created the space, the leisure in yourself for it to happen. And then he goes on, that the members of the community should love each other chastely. So what does that mean, to love each other chastely? What he's talking about here is not essentially whether it's sexual or non-sexual, but what he's talking about here is the love that you have for each other a form of exploitation, using the other person for yourself, or is it truly a love for the other as they are in themselves? Do we see the other, or other people, just as a solace for our own loneliness, as a way of occupying space that would otherwise be too lonely for us? Or do we truly see and therefore love the other for who they are in themselves? I think that's what loving chastely means. And then that may explain why the next thing he says is that the good zeal of the monk is built upon fearing God in love. Well, fear in this context, in the biblical context, the word fear doesn't mean the fear of being punished or being destroyed, but it's the fear that we might feel when you go up to the cliff edge on the other side of Bere Island and you look over the edge of the cliff. There's that kind of fear. It's a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, maybe a sense of danger too. I think the fear of God involves a certain sense of danger. It is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God, St. Paul says. So there's the sense that this is something much bigger than me. That's the fear involved. It's not the fear of punishment, but the sense of wonder at the bigness of what we are facing. It's a wonder, in other words, at the infinite space that we find in each person. And that's the relationship between solitude and community, is that we are seeing in each other that infinite spaciousness of God's love. So he says then he goes on, the other aspects of this good zeal are loving the abbot with a sincere and humble charity. The abbot is always a sort of a symbol, a kind of a concrete symbol of the life of the community. Preferring nothing to the love of Christ, or preferring nothing to Christ. And may he bring us all together to life everlasting. So he's taken us through, or from, this evil bitterness, which is hell, isolation, loneliness, self-centeredness, into a breakthrough into good zeal, which is the enthusiasm with which we listen to each other, put up with each other, that we serve each other, and which opens up then into a discovery of the infinite space present in each other person. And then that infinite space reveals itself as Christ. So there are several focal points in this process of good zeal. There is each other, the people we're living with, cooking with, sharing a room with, walking down to the Heritage Centre with. There is those who serve us in the community, as in any group, in your houses, You have people who help to coordinate and organize things. But there is ultimately Christ, the personal distillation of this whole process, and even beyond that, the ultimate goal that Jesus refers to as the Father, and we'll come to explore that a little bit later. Obedience is crucial to this good zeal. And we need to see that obedience is not just about doing what you're told, it's not just a passive availability or taking orders. Obedience in this sense is something proactive. You choose to be obedient. You don't just wait to be told something. Like a soldier who's hoping he won't get volunteered for some mission. So you don't just wait passively to be told what to do and then do it maybe with grumbling. But you are proactive. To be really obedient means that you are actively seeking the other in anticipation of their needs. That's the formula for happiness. This Christian hermit that I was quoting from a few times, Blessed Paul, uses the image of, when he talks about obedience, he uses the image of a donkey or a beast of burden. And when we're in that spirit of proactive obedience, we don't grumble anymore. Because why should we grumble if we're actively choosing to be obedient? We're free of the ego's grumbling and petty-mindedness. So he says we become like a beast of burden, and the donkey doesn't know whether it's carrying manure or gold. It just carries it. And the donkey doesn't know whether it's being led on a direct route or through a detour or by indirect route. It just doesn't ask, it just follows the path. So it's a maybe not altogether to all people an attractive symbol, but if you understand it in terms of this proactive obedience, it's quite a good illustration of the freedom of the mind to go with what is, to accept what is without grumbling or complaining. Okay, so that's Benedict. Let's look briefly at what Shantideva says in chapter 7 on what he calls the perfection of zeal, same word used here. One who has patience should cultivate zeal, because awakening is established with zeal. So no enlightenment. Remember in the first session we spoke about the need to adopt the spirit of awakening, not just to look at it and think about it and say, oh, it would be great to be awakened, but actually to embark upon it, to do something about it. So the second stage of the spirit of awakening is, to start, to practice, to have a coherent and regular practice. So, one who has patience should cultivate zeal, because awakening is established with zeal, and there is no merit without zeal, just as there is no movement without wind. So this is the energy, just as for Benedict, the energy of the community is the spirit of love that motivates each other in their proactive obedience to each other. So this is the energy. And then he says, what is zeal? Zeal is the enthusiasm for virtue. What is said to be its antithesis, it is spiritual sloth, clinging to the reprehensible apathy and self-contempt. It puts it very succinctly, doesn't it? So zeal is the enthusiasm for virtue. So if you say to yourself, well, I know that I've got all these faults. You know, I know I'm a bit selfish. I know I'm not very generous. I know I've got my problems, and I know I spend too much time thinking about myself, and I know that I'm not as nice as other people, I'm not as popular as other people, and people don't love me as much as they do other people, and so on. If we recognize all of that in ourselves, and we do nothing about it, then that's sloth. Just laziness. And zeal, good zeal, is the enthusiasm necessary, the energy necessary to say, well, all of that may be true, but I'm going to do something about it. Even if I only improve by, half a centimetre, at least it's improvement. At least I'm not just wallowing in my own stagnation, in my own self-pity, or as Shantideva says, my own self-contempt. Could we just show the picture of the sloth here? If you've got my calendar, the meditatio calendar for this month, then you'll see this picture of the sloth. Can you see that on the screen? See? So what would you say was the characteristic of this creature? Sloth. The sloth.
Speed.
What?
Speed.
Speed. Spoken like a true sloth. When I was in the Amazon, and I took this picture last summer, I was in a boat, and the guide saw this sloth at the top of a tree, and he pulled over to the bank, climbed up the tree. I was quite terrified he was going to fall and leave me alone in the middle of the Amazon. And then he found the sloth, and he detached the sloth without much effort from the branch it was sleeping on, and he just dropped it. And it was terrifying. I thought the poor creature was going to be killed as it hit the ground. But just at the last minute, it sort of put its arm up like that and just saved itself, almost on the last branch. So then the guide came down, and he again detached the sloth and threw it at me, and it just sort of fell into my arms like that. So it is a totally, what's the word? I mean, well, yes. I mean, it's just got no. It just doesn't do anything. No, what? Well, it's a kind of yes. I suppose you could say it's perfect yielding, but it's a total passivity, actually. So, what is on this? So this is the face of sloth. What kind of face has it got? Interesting.
To me, it looks very friendly.
It looks very friendly. Okay. Bit dumb. Yes. Thank you.
Relaxed.
Very relaxed, lazy, relaxed and lazy.
Expressionless.
Expressionless. Yes, that's what I think. I mean, it is kind of cute, but it's characterless, isn't it? No. Oh, I'm sorry. You like it?
I think it's so sweet.
I know.
Very reflective.
Okay. Wow. Interesting, all these defences of sloth. Very interesting.
It's not defence, it's knowledge of.
What?
It's not defence, but knowledge of the sloth.
It's not defence?
But knowledge of the sloth.
Oh, it's knowledge of the sloth. Okay, you're not defending it, you just know it. All right. Well, it is kind of cute, but it's not exactly, it hasn't got an evolved consciousness, does it? I mean, it doesn't look like a dog, does it? A dog that has real character and expression. But anyway, we won't argue about it. But I think sloth, we can talk about it later, but I think sloth, sloth is, anyway, this is what he's talking about here, is that spiritual sloth clings in the human, I mean, you can't blame this animal because it's not human. So, spiritual sloth in the human being clings to what is reprehensible. In other words, what doesn't do anyone any good. And to apathy, well, he's a bit apathetic, to be honest. And to self-contempt. So, what else does Shantideva say about zeal? He also says an interesting little verse, forsaking the supreme joy of Dharma, the teaching, spiritual teaching, forsaking the spiritual joy of Dharma, which is an endless stream of joy, how can you delight in frivolity and jokes, which are the two causes of suffering? That's quite challenging for us. St Benedict has a phrase somewhere where he says that monks should not be given to frivolous or rowdy laughter. And when we read that, we think, oh, it's a bit miserable. But it is very true. I've been in community at times with people who are very funny, but their jokiness is very shallow. And after a while, after you've lived with it for a while, you realize that it's an escape. It's a way of keeping themselves and people at a distance. It's funny, but it's kind of cold. And I don't know whether we could talk about this later. Our, one of the major sources of entertainment we have in our culture is comedy, organized comedy, stand-up comics, and I was watching it on television the other day, some comedian standing alone on a stage with a huge audience and a massive theatre. We seem to crave for that kind of stimulation, or is it escape, or is it consolation, or whatever it is. Anyway, we can talk about that later. But so here is both a Buddhist and a Christian teacher asking us to think about the distinction between just sort of laughter, empty laughter, and true joy. And in community, that's something that we have to be sensitive to continuously, I think. So the zeal, too, according to Shantideva, is what enables us to put up with the hard aspect of the work of the spiritual journey. However, this limited suffering of mine, which yields perfect awakening, is like the suffering of extraction when removing the pain of an embedded splinter. So you get a splinter in your skin, and getting the splinter out is painful. It's a relatively small degree of pain, however, but if you don't take it out, it will get infected and cause more trouble. So you're prepared, if you have enough zeal, if you're suffering from sloth, then you will avoid that little bit of pain. You won't make the effort to take the splinter out. It was like Jesus' remark about the splinter in your brother's eye. But if you've got enough zeal, enough energy, enough enthusiasm for your virtue, for your spiritual growth, then you don't mind enduring a little bit of effort or pain or difficulty in the discipline of your practice. All physicians cure with unpleasant treatments. Therefore, to destroy a multitude of pains, a slight one must be endured. So that becomes possible because of this zeal or enthusiasm. But then he goes on, and remember, this is a guide to the bodhisattva way of life, so it's a way of life that is oriented towards others rather than just towards our own personal awakening and private enlightenment. But it's where the fundamental dynamic of our spiritual practice is other-centered, is towards being of benefit to others, being useful to others. I must acquire many good qualities for myself and for others. Otherwise, the cultivation of every single good quality will not take place in myriads of eons. So without this fundamental other-centeredness at the heart of our spiritual practice, you're not going to make any progress, he says. And what is this fundamental other-centeredness is obedience. This is what Benedict calls obedience. Father John calls this turning towards the other in love, to draw the other into the light of being. And this other-centeredness, this proactive obedience, is what actually creates virtue, which is beneficial both to you and the other person. When one is made powerless by despondency, adversities are easily caused. But one who is uplifted and zealous is invincible, even in the face of great adversities. So, sloth, sinking into apathy and self-contempt, which is going to lead to what Benedict calls bitter zeal, that separates from God and from ourselves and from others. The alternative to that, in that state of mind, he calls powerless and despondent, then problems will multiply. You're just creating more and more problems for yourself. When you're in this state, when we are in this state of mind, everything we touch becomes a problem. Every phone call you get, every email, every person you meet becomes a problem. And you're dealing with those events in a daily life is just going to create more and more complicated problems, more and more negativity, until by the end of the day you've just had enough. So it depends how you start off. However, one who is uplifted, who has good zeal, this enthusiasm for virtue, is invincible even in the face of great adversities. So when things really do go wrong, when you have real problems, not just problems created by your negativity, but real problems in life, you can face them and deal with them. And the difference between those two types of zeal is what our meditation, of course, is all about. This is the opening of the heart. And this afternoon, enough for now, but this evening we'll look at this transition really from the bitter zeal, the negative self-reinforcing state of hell, compared with the good zeal, where we discover the infinite space within each other. They asked Jesus, "When will the kingdom of God come?" And he replied, "You cannot observe when the kingdom of God will come. You cannot say, 'Look, here it is,' or 'there it is,' because in fact, the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is in your midst." not sure whether we're supposed to finish at 12 or 12:30. Is it 12? 12:30. Oh, so we have a little time now. So, would anyone like to share any thoughts or reflections or raise any?
Yeah, I was interested in
Louder.
the Shantideva. He contrasted the zeal with sloth, and then Benedict contrasted good zeal and bad zeal. I was wondering whether bad zeal was basically sort of fundamentalism, sort of believing that you've got it when you've only got the idea, and not living it out. And then Benedict tries to show that it's about living it out. Do you think that's a danger of some types of religion, that they can have a bad zeal? Because he does use zeal, so it's some sort of kind of energy, but it's the wrong kind of energy. So could it be fundamentalism, which is bad zeal?
Yeah, it's certainly a form of it. The test of it, I think, is, well, as many people have said, does your religion make you into a nice person or not? And does it produce good fruits? I'm always puzzled by people who seem to feed on condemnation and they obviously do feel very energized by it, and they feel this is what, if they're religious, they feel God is, using them to defend the church or God's kingdom or a particular point of view. But what always amazes me is the zeal, I suppose, that they have just to negate, just to condemn. And especially when they're condemning something that doesn't have any obvious bad fruits. I mean, it might be justified if you could see that somebody was, running a cult or something that was really abusing people and so on, and that you wanted to attack this or to expose it. That's a little different. But even then, it's not. Even if you were attacking something that was harmful and negative and destructive in that way, you wouldn't be feeding off that yourself. You would be doing it in order to save the people who are being affected by it. So religion does lend itself, especially, but I suppose other ideologies too. Political groups. I mean, there were people who sincerely believed in the communist ideology as it was lived out in, East Germany or Poland, and they passionately believed in the ideology. Some of them did anyway. Many were hypocritical about it. So I think maybe any kind of ideology lends itself to that. But religion is particularly dangerous in that state, because it's claiming divine authority. And after all, that's what we're going to be exploring in the Passion narrative too soon, isn't it? That those who turn their bitter zeal against Jesus clearly wasn't doing any harm. I mean, I suppose that maybe they felt he was blasphemous, or he was leading the people astray, or maybe he was causing political unrest. We don't really know what their motivation was actually for the false trials and and the execution, but clearly they were motivated by a bitter zeal. And he was, of course, clearly not embittered by it. His own zeal was, good zeal, was stronger than their bitter zeal. Christiana.
When you described your experience with the sloth, that reminded me of my own experience in the Amazon with the sloth, which I think is quite metaphorical. I was driving in a van with the driver, a bunch of people, and the guy who was a local guy, and we almost ran over a sloth. So the guide decided to just take the sloth through the side of the road so that it wouldn't be run over. And he grabbed the sloth from the back because the claws are quite scary.
That's true. That's true.
They look like bear's claws.
Yeah.
They can do, great damage.
Yeah.
So he said, be careful, because if they grab you wrongly,
Yeah.
they will do great harm. And seeing that sloth, the animal, made me change my whole concept of what we call sloth, because apparently it's very cute and friendly and nice and non-energetic, but it's got this incredible amount of energy that can be really harmful. So I think like sloth can be the same thing. It can poison you and take the very marrow of our life.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Actually, my guy didn't think of that when he threw the sloth at me. But I did notice the nail. I bit this big claws, and they obviously must be very tenacious.
Yes.
And because he sort of hangs by inertia, but he sort of hangs into the tree or the branches. No, that's very true. That's a very good point. And sloth is a very difficult habit to break once you're in it. It's very seductive or insidious. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it as being as violent as the bad zeal or as the fundamentalism in a way.
Yes.
Well, it wants to attach to something. When it does that to you, or it does to a branch, it will take big chunks out of your arm because it thinks that you're a tree about this big. I don't think they're aggressive, they're defensive, but they just have to reflex to grab onto something.
The words of John Main that accompany this picture for March in the calendar. The important thing in meditating is to persevere saying the mantra from the beginning until the end of the meditation. Don't be impatient with yourself. It may seem nothing is happening, but everything is happening. Very well chosen text to accompany that, really. Because it may look as if meditation is slothful. You're sitting there doing nothing. But interiorly you are persevering, or there's the good zeal of the mantra. And to understand what's going on behind appearances there. Thank you.
When I first saw that,
Go on.
well, when I first saw that calendar, I really fell in love with it, and I saw that picture of the sloth and kind of took it in to show. And I didn't know what a sloth. I didn't know it was a sloth or a sloth. I didn't know what one was, but I felt very much like a bodhisattva thing, like compassion, like. And Bob Dylan says, "Don't judge what you don't understand." And there was something there. I felt like, well, what's the truth of this? What's the truth of this sloth? I don't know. Something came there that feels same about meditation, like the truth of something. And so when I saw that image, it brought for me something deeper than the way I often see things.
Well, we'll have to write a book called In Praise of the Sloth.
It's going to become the community master.
Well, it is very. Well, actually, I rather shocked a cousin of mine at Christmas. I gave them a copy of this, and I suddenly realized it was very like her father, who had died many years ago. And I said to her, do you know who this looks like? And she looked at it for a while, and then she looked at me and she said, yes, it does. But he wasn't like that at all. But he was a lovely man. But there is something kind of interesting about it, I think. Maybe something pre-conscious as well. And it's a form of life. I mean, all animals, all forms of life really are sacred, aren't they? And it's their very diversity that's the wonder of life. And you wouldn't sort of. I mean, if a human being had a bad zeal, they would say, let's exterminate all sloths, because they don't correspond to our ideal of perfection. So let's get rid of them. But what Benedict is saying is love the brethren and put up with their imperfections of body or character, because you've got your own imperfections. So we'll let the sloth away, we'll let the sloth go.
And what's wrong with changing the word you repeat?
So what's wrong with changing the mantra?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Well, the purpose of the mantra is to stages, really. There are different purposes on it. The first is to allow you to lay aside your thoughts, so that you detach from just mental consciousness and your stream of mental activity. And it does this by giving you a focal point of attention. The next thing that it does is to calm the mind. So the mind over time begins to calm down by the repetition of the word. And staying with the same word allows that process to proceed more smoothly and quickly, because you're paying attention to one thing. And you're not thinking about the meaning of the word as you say it. Even though it has meaning, you may know the meaning of the word, but you're not thinking about the meaning of it. But the deeper, or deepest level, really, of the purpose of the mantra is to take your attention off yourself, to take you beyond self-consciousness and beyond the divided mind. And the divided mind is one that is looking at itself, observing itself, and it's better to be self-aware than to be not self-aware. But that kind of self-awareness is not the ultimate goal of meditation or of one's spiritual evolution. So again, the purpose of the mantra is to lead you, as it were, to leave self behind, or beyond self-consciousness, into a simple state of being, unified, single-pointed, and simple. And at this point, we are most truly and fully ourselves. We have become whole. We are experiencing the healing of this work. And staying with the same word, I think, allows that process to go deeper and deeper, to move from one stage to the other more consistently. And so that the word, the mantra, becomes more and more rooted in the heart by staying with the same word. This is the tradition of the Jesus prayer, for example. It's very explicit in the Jesus prayer, but it's also very explicit in the conference at Cassian, where he speaks about this, that the word takes root in the heart and becomes like an anchor, really, for the mind, and as it descends into the heart. So it's a way of just going deeper. And then, in God's own time, this work of attention, which becomes less self-conscious and less of an effort and more of a simple act of faith over time. And so you say the mantra with more subtlety over time as it sinks into the heart. At first it seems as if you're just saying it in your head with constant interruptions and you're battling with all your distractions. That can be discouraging, and that's where, we need to understand what is the purpose of this and why is this tradition teaching it this way. So that stage is important to understand the why and the wherefore and how to do it. Then the next stage is where you can say the word for a longer period of time, longer periods of time, without being interrupted by your thoughts. Even though your thoughts may be still very active in the back of your mind, like background noise, but they less often interrupt you, interrupt this work of attention. And then the third stage, if you like, is when you say the word, maybe at least for periods of time, without distractions, without thoughts consciously being present to your mind. This might be, this might be quite rare. It depends on your practice. It depends how regular you are. It depends upon grace. It depends on good luck and all other sorts of things. But in that case, there's a subtle moment of your practice, because it may seem to you at that point, this is a beautiful space I've entered into. The mantra has been very useful. It's brought me into this quiet, clear space, like a blue sky with no clouds. I don't need to say the mantra anymore because I can just enjoy this. And so you may say to yourself, I have no thoughts. But the thought, I have no thoughts, is a thought. So you still have some remnant, actually quite a strong remnant, of self-consciousness there, of the divided or self-reflexive consciousness. So at this stage, it's also important to know why we say the mantra in the way that is recommended, because then it will be easier for you to know that you continue it. You continue saying it, although by this stage you're really listening to it much more attentively and in a more subtle way. So first you're saying it, then it's more as if you're sounding it with less effort, and then later it's more as if you're just listening to it, but your whole being is being focused and unified and simplified by this act of gentle listening. Now, this might sound as if you're trying very hard, but in fact you're not. There's more effort at the beginning than in the later stages. And then, as I say, in God's own time, you may be led into moments of pure prayer, or complete silence, where the mantra just leads you into silence and the mantra is left behind. But you don't choose when to stop saying it. That's essential to the understanding of this practice. We say the mantra until we can no longer say it. We don't choose when to stop saying it. And as soon as you realize you stop saying it, you start saying it again. So that's the teaching, that's the path. You can take it or leave it. But that's the tradition, and that's the wisdom. There is wisdom in that, I think, if you explore it, and your own experience teaches you more and more of why that is a wise, a simple, and really a very universal path. But as I was saying yesterday, at first we may have to take this on trust and intuitively, and we're all a bit skeptical, and we want to keep our options open. And meditation doesn't replace other forms of practice or other forms of prayer. Christians often, haven't heard about meditation, sometimes get a little nervous because they think it means, they can't pray in any other way, or other ways of prayer are invalidated, but experience quickly proves to you that that's not the case. In fact, the other forms of prayer may be simplified, and if there's a bit of magic or a little superstition left in those other forms of prayer, then I think the meditation will clear that superstition and magic out. And what you're left with is pure forms of prayer and practice appropriate to you. So you can choose. You find which other forms of prayer are useful to you. And, but this is a kind of a base practice. And I think most traditions recommend that you have a certain base practice.
Just one more question. I chose a very simple mantra, but I can't help thinking in its meaning. I'm constantly aware of what I am saying.
Yeah. If you're constantly thinking of the meaning of the word that you're saying, well, I think it will eventually. You will eventually, if you're regular with the practice, and you're saying the word with the intention of leaving your thoughts behind, then you will stop thinking about the meaning of it eventually. But it would be easier if at the beginning you took a word that was not in your own language. Even if you knew the meaning, but if it's in your own language, it's going to ring lots of little bells, and semantic fields around that word will be activated. So if I'm not saying you can't do what you feel you want to do, but if you take a word that's full of meaning, if you take God, I love you, or something like that, it's a perfectly good mantra. But God is a very loaded word for the mind. The word I is a very loaded word, and the word you keeps the mind in a dualistic state. I love you. So the purpose of the meditation, in fact, is to move beyond that dualistic mind into a unified state, into a communion or union of love. So it's helpful if you take a word that is not in your own language. But what really matters is not the technique or the methodology as the faith with which you say it.
That's stability. The stability in the practice.
It's the stability and the practice, and that's the faith, that's the fidelity. Faith is, Shantideva talks about perseverance. Well, faith is, perseverance, I think, is also a manifestation of faith. Faith is many things, but you can't have faith without perseverance.
What has been said today about kindness and what this community, our community and the community of this island reminds me of is a short story that I would love to share with you. It's a story about a student that wanted to know what is hell and what is heaven. And he went to a master and asked him, "Master, please show me how it is to be in hell, how it is to be in heaven." And the master showed him a picture of a table, and there, on the table there were all the possible wonderful foods. And everything most delicious that you can imagine. And people were sitting by the table, and they had their cutlery, forks, tied to their hands. And forks were extremely long, so they couldn't really enjoy this food. They were just sitting by the table and watching it and suffering extremely because they couldn't enjoy it. And then the master showed him a picture of heaven. It was exactly the same picture. The difference was that people took those forks and they were feeding one another. And I think that this, at least what I've been experiencing in our houses, the kindness and the warmth and so much good touch, people really caring more about one another than themselves. I think it's a piece of heaven. This island is a piece of heaven. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good. That